Okay. So glad everyone could join us. I'm Robin Riddle with Stanford University's Parkinson's community outreach program, and I'm joined by Denise, my colleague also at Stanford, and she and I run a lot of the caregiver support groups here, organized by Stanford. We're so glad today to have Lois Kelly joining us. I just recently finished her book, Slow Loss. It's a wonderful book. I'm so glad that she's joining us today. Lois has written quite a lot of essays and books on family life. Slow loss is just one of them. Another one is called Be the Noodle, and another's Naked Hearted. And she also has written some books and essays about work life called Rebels at Work and Beyond Buzz. She is a champion of people who think differently and work bravely. She herself feels that one of her great strengths is being brave and being generous. And I think you'll find her talk today very interesting. She started her career writing human interest stories for Boston area newspapers, and you can tell she's just a very fine writer that comes across in her book. So we're so glad to have her here today. And I think Lois, you're going to start with the reading or two, and then we'll launch into your presentation.
Exactly. Yes, for everyone, I want to read a couple of things and then go into a little presentation about my experience as a caregiver, what my biggest challenges were, and some of the things that helped me. So let me just share a couple of stories. So here's the first one. The most dangerous part of Route 95, which runs from Maine to Florida, is in Rhode Island. The 2-mile stretch from Pawtucket to Providence is known as the S-curve. Crashes on the S-curve are legendary. Tractor trailers, 5-car pileups, overturned Hondas. If you drive into the S-curve going faster than 65 miles per hour, you're asking for trouble, especially if it is dark, icy, snowy, foggy, rainy, or packed. So it's almost always usually dangerous. Every day, I drive my husband to Providence for another medical appointment. Urologist, neurologist, primary care, lymphedema clinic, cardiologist, physical therapist, and speech therapist. No one can figure out why he has gained 40 pounds in a month, why he can't walk, why his usual slender feet won't fit into even EEE shoes, and why his poor balls are like balloons, aching and ready to burst as he tries to take one step and then another. The blood work comes back normal. No meds have changed. We don't eat salt, meat, processed foods, sugar, or alcohol. Everything is the same as last month, and nothing is the same. The advancing Parkinson's disease chokes and freezes him and exhausts him, but it has never blown him up like a blimp. Maybe you should go to some specialists in Boston, says one physician. I'm stumped about what could be causing this. She doesn't realize that he can hardly handle the 20-minute drive from our house to Providence, let alone a 4-hour round trip to Boston hospitals. Yesterday was supposed to be a short 15-minute drive to a medical appointment. 10 minutes into the drive, my husband shouted at me as we were on the S-curve. Pull over, my legs are going crazy. I have to get out of the car. I swerved across 2 lanes to reach the nearest exit. He screamed louder and grabbed the door handle. The car was still moving across lanes of speeding traffic. I need to get out of this car now. My kind, gentle husband had morphed into a bloated, angry monster, seething with pain, fear, and helplessness. Humiliated that he needs help in the shower, help to get his shoes on, and help to get in the car. Athletic and independent until the PD started eating away his brain, he's now at a new low, disgusted with himself, with doctors, with my ability to get off the highway faster so that he can walk out his leg pain in the parking lot of an abandoned electronics store. Today's a new day. and there's another specialist appointment. As I enter the S curve, I press harder on the gas pedal, accelerating instead of gently braking, consciously thinking that killing ourselves would be better than this nightmare. I can no longer do this. 65, 70, 85, 92 miles per hour. The car shakes and strains as I hug the curve in the left lane. I've had enough. Somehow I snap out of it. I let my foot off the gas, put on the blinker, cut off a couple of people, and get over to the right lane to exit. Today, I was the one who had to get out of the car and shake off despair. When my mother taught me how to drive in Boston years ago, she told me it was okay to cut people off, but be polite enough to use your blinker. Yes, Boston drivers are crazy. I am crazy today. My father died in a hospital at 5 a.m. My mother, sisters, and I drove back to her house, made some calls, took a nap, and then went shopping. No black or frumpy clothes, she said, as we went from one small boutique to another. Cornflower blues, magentas, oranges. Though usually frugal, we tossed down our credit cards for another gorgeous find. In times of despair, the women in my family turn to beauty, dressing ourselves up like Barbie dolls. When we're happy, we dress simply, like LL Bean, and don't shop. What about these shoes? Oh no, you need more of a heel if you're going to wear them with the long skirt. Is this scarf too much? Yes, it overpowers you. Too much fabric. Go for this long and narrow one. Since that frightening S-curve day, I shop on my phone as I sit in medical waiting rooms. Polka dot, wide-legged pants, red leather boots, a tie-dyed blue tunic, an emerald green necklace. Dressing up to sit in blah beige waiting rooms settles me down and makes me more hopeful. Many psychologists say that emotional shopping is an unhelpful way to manage anxiety. Many psychologists have no understanding of what happens when you're caring for a spouse with a long-haul degenerative disease, a spouse who is morphing physically and cognitively into a stranger. After 7 months of trips up and down Route 95 on the S-curve, a specialist discovers a hole in the atrial septum of my husband's heart. This might be the cause of the edema. Either way, it's something that needs to be taken care of soon, says the cardiologist. People remark about my outfit as I sit in the hospital waiting room during his surgery. Fashion is a good distraction for them and for me. It gives us something superficial to chat about and a reprieve from worrying about surgical outcomes. You got those snakeskin boots at J. Crew? Really? Do you mind me asking how much? I dish out fashion advice for waiting in doctors' offices and hospitals. Always put an extra phone charger, a Kindle, and a pashmina in a bag because these hospitals are always so cold. The pashmina doubles as a blanket if you're stuck in the ER overnight. And you can get some decent quality knockoffs on Amazon. My husband is back to 180 pounds, and the specialist vigils are over for now. I try not to worry about his newest PD symptoms, psychotic dementia. The hallucinations are friendly right now. What happens if they get violent? You'll just drive down 95 to the psychiatric hospital, and we will readjust his medications, says the neurologist. Imagine driving through those S-curves with someone in a full-blown psychotic breakdown. The purple skinny jeans arrived today. I also bought a green, blue, and orange fairy hat from an Irish knitter on Etsy. It's perfect. While I'm trying to rein in this shopping insanity this morning, I succumbed again and bought a new pair of hiking boots that were 60% off. This month is a good month. There aren't too many medical appointments. I, however, am rocking the supermarket aisles as I buy ingredients for protein-rich, easy to swallow food for my husband. "You look so cheerful in that coat," says a woman in the produce section who is undergoing chemo treatments. "It's Patagonia. Andy's blue," I tell her. "I got it for $30 at that new consignment store." Beautiful distractions are an antidote to despair and advancing death. That's how I roll. I remind myself of this every time I take the S curve. And then I have one more story before the presentation. It's a little bit of I wrote this in my journal on a hard day. "Dear God, or divine guidance, or Jesus, Mary, or Joseph, please help me stay optimistic. Please don't let me become bitter and brittle. I struggle every week to be a caring, patient, kind, compassionate, and good listener, like all the Parkinson's and Alzheimer's associations recommend. I struggle not to morph into a victim. But man, oh man, some days are really hard. His hallucinations are usually nice monkeys or children, but those snakes were violent. He threw his iPad across the room to get him. He installed security cameras outside and inside the house. He keeps accusing me of being the cause of all his issues and discomfort. Then there's the obsessive spending, especially on sump pumps, hoses, and replacement parts for the sump pumps. We've never needed to turn the sump pump on. We now have 3 sump pumps installed. Jesus, please never flood our yard. But if you do, we will be ready. And then there are the denials. "I'm fine," he says, when I try to pick him and the rollator up off the floor at 2:30 a.m. This is not fine. And dear God, I hate that edge in my voice when we have visitors. "Wow," they say, "he is doing great. I thought he'd be in worse shape after all these years with the disease." "He is not doing great," I correct them. "You have no idea." My response makes them feel uncomfortable. Maybe they think he's right when he tells them I am going crazy, not him. Thank you, God, for sending me good friends who are going through the same things with their husbands. They've taught me so much, and they never judge my despairing outbursts and stories about what's going on with Greg and me. I'm so sorry these friends' spouses have been sick for so long, God. They've told me about their angry, bitter years and how they are largely behind them now. These caregiver sisters and brothers are amazing people. Please, God, make me more like them. Help me get beyond this bitterness. The sooner, the better. Dear Lois, this is God. I've reviewed your many letters and want you to know I have love rays beaming into your house. I overheard you telling your sisters that you feel like you're finally settling into the new place, making it a home versus a temporary place to live until he dies. This acceptance you're feeling is from one of my love beings. Remember last week when you thought the moon was lighting up the pond outside your bedroom windows? Those were my love beings. In addition to the love beams, I'd like to suggest a few things. I want you to let him go down to the cellar and play with his new sump pumps. Stop nagging him with "be careful" every time he goes downstairs. If he falls down the stairs, you call 911. If he buys too many hoses and sump pumps, you eventually call JD Junk Dog and they'll take them away in their trash trailer. No big deal. I also want you to practice using a new word. Every time you mutter "fuck" loudly or in your head, replace it with "okie dokie." Because, honey, it will be okie dokie. You have so many good friends. You've got enough money to hire some help. Whoa, whoa. Do I hear you pushing back on that statement? I know you worry incessantly about money, but there will be enough, not gobs for big trips or a house in Woods Hole, but enough so that you can hire help to get out of the house. Know that winter will be hard again. Your friends will be heading to St. John, Florida, Portugal. You'll be putting ice melt on the driveway. I'm absolving you of all Puritan guilt about being lazy in the dead of winter. Read, binge on those TV series, sleep late if you can. When you're rested, you're much less likely to be bitter. You can do this, my love. There's nothing good about this situation with your husband. Know that I am not testing your goodness, nor making you do penance for that which will not be written. It's just the end of life on earth, the wearing away of mind and bodies. This is not to be feared. Others will have their challenges too, so don't think you've been called out in some special way. You're just walking through this earlier than your friends. You do know, I hope, that your friends have always looked up to you, especially your bravery. Show them how to care for a partner bravely. Let them in on the struggle for love over bitterness. You don't have to hide the ugly and put a smiley face on things. We don't give sainthood to martyrs. Things will get worse, you know that. I am here for you, as are your sisters, cousins, friends, neighbors, and those 911 EMS professionals. Now go take a shower, put on your favorite fleece sweater, turn off the computer, and relax. Okie dokie? Dear God, okie dokie? For some reason, I thought you'd sound more dignified, like a British Shakespearean actor. But Roger on the relaxing and not becoming, oh, woe is me, all the time. So, the stories. And now let me I'll share my screen. Oops, sharing is not turned on. Could someone?
Let me see.
Okay,
Sharing. Oh, I think you should be able
okay,
to request it. Yep.
yep,
Yeah. Let me say yes.
okay.
Is anything happening positively at your end, Lois?
It is. It's
Okay, good.
positively happening.
All right.
Okay, let me get to the beginning here. So what I want to share with you today is I am not a Parkinson's expert. I am a caregiver who helped my husband for 16 years. And I want to share what I faced as what the biggest challenges for me, what helped me somewhat, and then we can open it up for questions and discussions. This is this used to be the little pond that we lived on for 35 years. We eventually had to move because there were too many stairs in our house. It was the beginning of many losses. A little background in I think it was 2010, I wrote a book called Be the Noodle 50 Ways to Be a Compassionate, Courageous, Crazy Good Caregiver that a lot of people really liked. It was, I called it a caregiver's adventure guide. And it was largely the story of helping my mother die from brain tumors. And people said, wow, it must have been easier for you when Greg got sick because you wrote that book. And I have to tell you, one of my challenges is that my mother, from her diagnosis, well, she was diagnosed and she died 4 months later. And being a caregiver when it's a sprint doesn't compare to being a caregiver for someone with Parkinson's, which all of us know can last for years and years. So the answer is no. Having written a previous book about caregiving didn't help me so much with this adventure. Let me give you some background. My husband, this is in 1984, was an athlete. And he just proud, he just mountains, marathons, that was his thing. And this is in 2014, 2 years into his diagnosis. There was a wonderful Parkinson's walk that he tried to do. It took him hours, but he did it. He felt really good about it. And one of the things that made our experience somewhat easier than other people is my husband's desire to be independent, his sense of perseverance, and pushing himself. Things were pretty okay. And then in 2018, he had this issue with edema that was no one could figure it out, and he had began to have troubles swallowing, began to have some falls. In 2020, things were getting rough. He bought this souped up rollator because he loved walking in the woods. This was one day, and I don't know if any of you can relate to this. I said, we are not going out to the woods. If something happens, I won't be able to get you up. And he said, we're going, I'm fine, I'm fine. And here he is as we're setting off on a spring day. Not too far into this walk, he did fall. And it was hard to get self coverage. I don't know how I got him and the rollator up, but 2020, and so then by then, we were several years into the disease, was kind of a turning point. And the really difficult years were the end years for us, from 2020 to 2023. He died last year. And in these years, the challenge was the cognitive changes, the hallucination, and the Parkinson's dementia. Through to the end, my husband was largely able to dress himself and shower himself. So we didn't have those physical issues, but the cognitive issues were the most serious ones for us. So I know we always say, well, what are the stages of Parkinson's? And they're written about, but I sort of looked at what are the caregiving stages of Parkinson's? I think we're all different, but for me, the first one was acceptance. When my husband was first diagnosed, I thought, we've got this, we can do this. There were mobility issues and he was tired and there was anxiety, but I thought, man, this is not a problem. I can handle this. And then the next stage that kind of moved in was, for me, anxiety, where I start to think, what's going to happen next? Because different sorts of behaviors were developing, as well as physical things. My husband, again, bless his heart, because he was so strong, most nights he would have trouble swallowing and he would force himself to vomit. Some nights were fine. He could sit down and eat a meal, and sometimes he couldn't. He developed compulsive spending issues. So I just never knew what was going to happen. And I started to became my next phase was anxious. I was sort of always on alert, but some days I would move back to, I've got this. I can do this. The third phase for me was anger and despair, where I thought, I am losing it too. My husband had hallucinations, paranoia, would accuse me of being the problems. And I just felt despair. Am good at I'm good at solving problems. That was my business career. The cognitive issues were much more challenging. And then for me, I would say the last stage was exhaustion, as my husband, for the last 8 months of his life, uh, had to be moved into a care facility, largely because of the cognitive and paranoia issues. So it was exhaustion, relief, and then when he died, I felt a little bit, well, maybe more than a little bit, that I had post-traumatic stress disorder. It was pretty intense. And it was largely, I think, because I kept flipping back to, I can do this, and I didn't ask for help enough. And I'll get into that in a minute. There's a woman, Marcy Villette. She's just come out with a new book where it's a graphic novel about being a PD caregiver, and I love this. One of the graphics is being a super caregiver. I am up to the task. And as I've talked to other PD caregivers around the country, there seems to be a theme that we all thought we could do it all. One of the challenges, in addition to deluding myself that I could do it all, was my husband kept saying, "You're the problem," and that I was too sensitive and that I had to calm down. I've always been a very optimistic, logical person. He would also tell our sons that, "Don't listen to your mother. She's getting crazy, and I'm just fine." Of course, he was not just fine. When we would go to his neurologist or to some other specialist, I called this showtime, where unknown to me, he would pop some extra carbidopa, levodopa. It was sort of like taking cocaine. And he would be like his old self. So that when the doctor talked to him, he seemed fine. And the doctor, every doctor's appointment, the doctors would say, "You are doing great. You can live for a very long time." And I would just sort of be despairing, and I would say, "Well, what do you mean a long time?" And they said, "Well, your husband, he's other than the Parkinson's, he's pretty healthy. He could live into his 90s." Those days I wanted to weep because I thought, how can I do this for, at that point, my husband was in his early 70s. How can I do this for 20 or 25 more years? And people would often say, very unhelpful, and it would sort of make me crazy. And they would say, "Gee, he's doing great. I thought it'd be worse. You shouldn't be worrying." Or other people would say, "Michael J. Fox, he's doing great too." And I got to the point where instead of just taking it from people, it felt like they were just kicking me. I would actually I had to push back, and I would say, "He's not that's interesting that you think that, but actually he's not doing great. We're doing the best we can, but it is not a great situation." And I found that I would then flip back and sort of gaslight myself and think, well, other people have it worse than me. And I'm such a drama queen. Why am I being such a drama queen? Maybe this is all in my head. Maybe it's not so bad. And even when I sent the first draft of the book, Slow Loss, to my editor, I said, "I don't know. I'm not sure I don't know if I should publish this book because maybe I was overreacting." And I mean, he was very helpful and said, "Go talk to some of your friends. We're not overreacting, and we should be kinder to ourselves. It's very hard, and it's painful, and there's suffering. Accept it, and please be kind to yourself." And the other challenge I had sometimes was I just wanted to run away some days. And in fact, I had a friend, her husband died this morning, a caregiver friend, and we would play make believe. And some days I would call her and say, "Hey, Carla, there's a Swiss Air flight leaving for Zurich tonight, and there are seats available. Do you want to go with me?" And she'd say, "Oh, I don't know about going to Switzerland. How about we go to Norway?" And we just, of course, both of our husbands were very, they couldn't be without us, but it was fun to imagine running away. And I was so fortunate to have friends who would play make believe with me. I want to share 10 things that helped me. Not always, but sometimes. One thing is, I love this. A screaming song is good to know in case you need to scream. For me, the screaming song was Gloria Gaynor back in the disco days. I'm 69, so, and she had a song, "I Will Survive." And there were some days I just put "I Will Survive" on the radio in my car or in the living room, and I just screamed the lyrics. It's silly. It made me feel better. The other thing is just in the midst of a difficult situation on a difficult day, sometimes I would just look out the window. I couldn't take an hour to go somewhere. I couldn't take a half day to go somewhere, but I could take 5 or 10 minutes and look out the window at how the wind was moving, or listen to the birds, or smell the air and know snow is coming. And just those 5 or 10 minutes often helped me just relax and ground myself a little bit. I also took a class and bought this wonderful book called Unwinding Anxiety from a professor here at Brown. And what I like about this book is that simple tools and practices to manage anxiety. And one of the ones that I started to use is when I would feel myself getting very emotional, whether it was angry or despair or just exhaustion and feeling like I just couldn't deal. Once it started, I had a word that I would use, and I would say avalanche. And it would snap me out of it. It would be like, okay, I'm beginning to go down an unhelpful spiral. So sometimes just having a word that snaps you out of something and stops it is a useful technique. I'm the biggest fan of having a Parkinson's support group. Many of you probably have that group. I was in a group, I still am. We sort of stay together, even though when our husbands die, it's called graduating. And close friends. I found with close friends that sometimes people who didn't understand the disease would just start giving me advice that was so unhelpful that it made me want to scream. So I learned to say to friends, listen, I need to talk to someone tonight. And all I want is for you to listen to me. I don't want any advice. Can I just talk to you? And so I found if I used that, then the conversations were helpful. And there were times where I needed help. And I would say, I need help with this. And then friends would give me that help. Sometimes I thought I asked friends for help, but it was too vague. So being specific is, this is what I need. I need to be heard, I need to be hugged, or I need to be helped. Helped my friends help me, and for me to appreciate them and love them more than I already do. Another technique was our strengths. There was early in my husband's diagnosis, the American Parkinson's Disease Association sponsored a 5-day workshop at Kripalu, which is a yoga center in Western Massachusetts. It was the most wonderful program. It was part Western medicine and part Eastern medicine, about how to deal with Parkinson's for someone who has it and also for caregivers. One of the most helpful parts of that 5 days for my husband and I was learning our innate strengths. The VIA Institute on Character, it's based on enormous research, has identified 24 character strengths that we all have, but we all have some are much more dominant than others. And when we understand what our dominant strengths are, we can lean on them and use them to kind of lift us up and help us out of a situation. My husband's, one was perspective. So until kind of the end stages of Parkinson's, he was very good at understanding what was going on, what he could do to help himself and be independent, what I was going through. Another one of his was perseverance, that he didn't give up. So he really worked. He didn't become someone who just expected me to do everything, which was very helpful. And he also had a love of beauty and excellence. So some days he would say, let's paint the wall and it'll be so beautiful. And love of appreciation of beauty and excellence is mine as well. My top strengths are creativity, honesty, and bravery. So I wrote every day. That's why much of this book came from writing every day about what was happening. And the writing was my little escape. So I have put a link here and we can put it in the chat. I used to use this for my professional work, where people in big organizations would identify their strengths and then talk about how they could use them in their teams. But if this might help you, it's a free evaluation. It takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes to do. Music was huge for me. I and especially I'm sort of a fangirl of Nick Cave, and Nick Cave lost one of his sons about the time my husband was in his end stages of Parkinson's. And Nick Cave had a beautiful album called Ghosteen that I played and I played and I played, and it was just sort of the music that filled my soul. Um, it was like a blanket comforting me. And I felt with this singer who I don't know him, but I felt heard. So music of whatever kind of music, if you can just put your earbuds in and even for 5 or 10 minutes, just listen to music, it has a great healing power. In my loving kindness meditation, I switched mine around. And I also used a loving kindness for my husband. So for myself, I added to my loving kindness prayer, may I learn from my sorrow and be transformed by it. Throughout the process, I thought there's something for me to learn from this situation. I don't know what it is, but I kind of prayed for it. And for my husband, you know, I prayed, may you be comforted, may you have more good days than bad days, and may your hallucinations be friendly. The other thing that really helped is knowing when to stop. And by this, I mean, when do we stop bringing our loved ones to every single appointment, for every single kind of test? It got to the point every time we went to another doctor's office, getting in the car, getting to the doctor's office, making sure we had extra pills and Depends with us, caused so much anxiety that I think it made my husband much worse. And we finally got to a point when I said, that's enough. Do you really need to go to the podiatrist? No. Do we really need to have, you know, go to the eye doctor? No. Does this tooth need to have a crown put on? No. So once I think stopping things, there's so many specialists, and you can just be on a treadmill of going and going and going. I think it really ruins what's left of a person's quality of life, and bringing a person to constant meetings, constant medical tests as a caregiver, it is exhausting, and stressful, and it also can really damage a relationship and cause resentment with your loved one. The ninth thing is understanding despair. One of my favorite poets is David White. And, he talks about despair is a difficult, beautiful, necessary, binding understanding between human beings. And that despair is a season, and left to itself, um, it will change. And I tried in listening to his poetry to remember nothing lasts. And this is a season. The other thing, the picture on the left is I made this collage for myself to remind myself of what my what, who I had always been as a person. I sort of always been sort of realistically optimistic and exuberant, and I love dancing, and that I hadn't lost it. And so this picture was just for me. Um, and it would also remind me it was what we were going through was a season that would end. And the 10th thing that helped was this understanding of what liminality is. So liminality is this in-between state. So the life that we once had with all our habits and expectations and dreams and the relationship with the person with PD just is no longer. We don't know what the future will be. Again, I don't know about all of you, but often I would like Google at night, stages of Parkinson's. How long can a person live? And we don't know what that's going to be. So that living in liminality is that in-between space. And I tried, not always successfully, to make peace with living in liminality, giving up what once was, all these slow losses in the disease, that's gone. And then looking ahead, you can't look ahead yet. You don't know what that will be. You don't know how things are going to unfold. So that's the kind of prepared part that I want to share with you. Also, we're going to open it up for questions and discussions, but I also have a website called Lois Kelly Writing, where I write essays beyond the book. So I just invite you to go there. Then you can read more about some of the dark humor and the funny things that I have written.
Thank you, Lois. That was
You're
wonderful.
welcome.
Yeah. Is the loiskelly.writing.com, are they essays about caregiving, about your experience with caregiving, or that and other things?
That and other things.
Okay.
I found sometimes just to kind of stay sane is that I would write about other things too,
Mhm,
that I was
mhm,
still a person. I
mhm.
didn't want myself identified only as a caregiver. So
Right.
I would sort of force myself to write other things as well.
Okay. And if people have questions, please use the Q&A box or the chat. Either will work, and I'll ask the questions as we go along. I recently finished the book, Lois, Slow Loss, and I wanted to start there with the title. what does the title slow loss mean? You mentioned that in the book as well as slow slicing. Maybe you could
Yes.
talk about those things.
Yeah, I used slow loss that with Parkinson's, it isn't like all of a sudden someone's well and then they're sick. It's the little bits that kind of chip away at us, and we're slowly losing our person. And and it's slow, and then sometimes it's fast, and we're also losing our relationship. Slowly. You're going from a whether it's a parent or a spouse or a good friend, the relationship you had that you loved is no longer. And each decline, however small, is so, so tough. And they seem relentless. And so I think it's a very different kind of caregiving. There's no predictability, with with people who have cancer, it's like, okay, then we're going to do chemo and then this is going to happen. And even with hospice, they'll say, here's what it's likely to go down. My husband was in hospice and they discharged him because they're like, we think he's fine because he was bad. And then he sort of blipped up, and then of course he declined again. So I think it's slow loss, and it's also, I say to people, it's like long haul caregiving, and it's really
Mhm,
different. People stop checking in on us because they think, well, you know, person's still alive. They must
mhm.
be doing okay. We don't
Right.
get that outpouring that people get when, oh my gosh, they just had a heart attack. They just had surgery to remove a cancerous tumor.
Yeah. One thing that you didn't mention very much in your book was friends. Whether did you and your husband lose many of your friends, or did they continue to come over?
A lot of people felt too uncomfortable coming over. So, I mean, my husband had, and then it was COVID during some of the worst of it too.
Mm,
My husband had two wonderful friends who would call every week. Um, and they were just wonderful. They would, no matter what, and I could hear some days my husband just rambling on about nonsense. And I could hear them on the phone just being really patient, and really kind. Um, but people just, I don't think for like long haul caregiving, I didn't feel the empathy from people. It
yeah,
was just sort of, it becomes life as usual.
yeah. Well, you said Greg had Parkinson's and dementia for 18 years. That's a very
Well, it
long.
was, he was diagnosed 12 years he had it, but really
Mm,
probably 4 to 5 years before then, things
mhm.
were amiss.
Yeah, very long time.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about your two sons, Greg Jr. and Ian, and how they managed the changes that they saw in their father?
Yeah. My stepson, Greg Jr., he was just sort of in denial. And he lives in Miami, and he would call his dad all the time. My husband would pop extra carbidopa levodopa before a call, so he'd be all hyped up. And my he wouldn't talk to me. He would talk to his father, which was great. But my husband would say, "I am great," and um, so then Greg would call me and say, "Mom, I really think you're overreacting." And I'm like, I'm not overreacting. It just, so it was a very difficult, it was difficult. And our youngest son, um, he came home for COVID for 6 months. So he experienced it. And he just began to feel the grief then that I've lost my father. He started to see his father change when he was a teenager. So he never really knew the good parts of his father. Um, And I feel so sad about that. And my youngest son has not read the book or listened to the book.
Mm,
And he said it's just too depressing for me. And I have to hold on to something good of my father.
mhm,
Um, and I didn't want to burden them. I didn't want to say, come home, you need to do this. They were both doing exciting things. Maybe I should have, but I wanted them to be able to live their lives and not burden them.
mhm, mhm. Could you talk a little bit about nagging? You mentioned frequently in the book that you thought of yourself as somebody who was nagging. Your husband would complain about your nagging. You seem to have some high anxiety about certain things, and at different points in time, you decided to let go and just whatever happens, happens.
Right. So you picked up on that nagging. Yeah, I don't know why we think that if we nag, someone will actually change their behavior, especially someone who has cognitive issues. And I just thought at first I didn't see it as nagging. It would be like I thought it was coaching. Here's what you need to do so that you don't fall. And here's don't do this. And at some point I realized this is silly. He's resenting me for this, and he's going to do whatever he wants. I need to let it go, and I needed to let go. I think deep in our brain, this our fight or flight. Um, Certainty is one of mine. I love certainty. And I just had to realize with Parkinson's, there's no certainty. And that was on me to work on myself to try to let go of that. Sometimes I did, and sometimes I would fall back to bad behaviors. But it's the whole thing of how how we react to things. That's on us. That we can manage that. And I will also say some things that happen, like some of the falls and choking, those can be a crisis. So it's okay to react in a frightened way.
Mhm. Somebody asks, can you talk a little bit more about how you coped with uncertainty or unpredictability? What helped you?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that helped me was, it's funny, but things that were predictable, like the seasons. So we lived on a pond near some woods. So, when I would know, I would see the birds migrating. I would, at the end of March, the very last week of March, the spring peepers start to sing. And I took so much joy in the peepers. It was, I know the holidays are coming, but for me, it's the spring peepers. And that sort of nature grounded me and gave me a certain sense of predictability, or to see how the sun changed as the seasons changed. So nature helped me. Um, it grounded me with the predictability.
There's a lot about beauty, beauty of you talked about fashion as your earlier story and what you wore in the waiting room, and a lot about beauty of the bird song and nature.
Mhm.
There's a lot about those seeing small pleasure in things around us. Could you talk a little bit more about that being a balm for you?
Absolutely. I think sometimes it's easy to say, oh my gosh, I need a week away. I need 2 nights away for respite. And it's not realistic. Um, so for me, I started to say, what are little moments of respite for me? What are the small things? And with those strengths that I mentioned, the where you'll find respite, in those small moments often depend on your strengths. And one of my strengths is appreciation of beauty and excellence. For someone else, it might be creativity. So they might, I don't know, I know some friends like knitting helped them, just gave them that kind of creative outlet. So for me, it was, again, it was COVID, which was a curse and a blessing because I took some classes at Rhode Island School of Design. I took a photography class and I would just go out in my town. And my husband sometimes would come and sit in the car or he'd get his rollator and I would take, photographs, which was, and then I would be on Zoom with like, what I would call like regular people, young people, and talking about our photographs. So it just gave me just like, oh, so it was like a little mini escape to take photographs for half an hour and then to be on a Zoom call for an hour with these, fledgling professional photographers. I also took up collaging and did that, which was helpful. And I tried to walk, you know, as every day. We had a dog that was my husband's dog, but it became my dog because he couldn't take the dog for a walk. So going for a walk for the dog at night and just, sometimes we would lose power and I'd take the dog and I'd look in people's windows and, just, see how people had their candles or the flashlights and life was going on.
Mm. And did your husband share some of those appreciations of beauty that
He
you had?
did.
You
He
expressed?
did. He did. He would have grand plans for when we had to move out of we had lived in the same house for 35 years. And when we were young and we moved into the house, we had no money. It was a disaster. And we made it our dream house. And it was so sad when we had to leave it. And so and he kept saying with the new house, well, we can do this. And so it was fantasy for us. I wasn't going to spend a lot of money on this house, but we would sit in the living room and fantasize about what we could do to make the house beautiful. And just having that conversation was really fun. And it was sort of being our old selves.
Hmm.
It was great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Someone asked, did you ever use respite care?
The way I used it is I had my sons come home, one or the other come home so that I could leave. There was one situation, it was a crazy day, and I actually thought I was having a heart attack. And I took myself to the ER, and there's nothing wrong with me. I was having a panic attack. And my doctor said, you need to get away. And one of my sons came home so that I could do that. It was very important. I was really, I just worked myself way up and I just had to step back. I also found for getting help, I was worried about money. People in my caregiver group, some of them had lots of financial resources. I couldn't do what they were doing, but I found things, and my husband resisted me, but I found a woman, she was lovely. Her father had died of Parkinson's. And I said to my husband, she'll just do light housekeeping, and he enjoyed her a lot. My husband always wanted to do house projects and have power drills, which when you have Parkinson's, you really don't want someone using power tools. So I hired a nice young guy, um, and he would do those things with my husband. He knew how to do them, but my husband would be instructing and teaching him, and my husband felt like he was making the house nicer. So I think in finding care, if you can be creative in how you go about it, that helped me Yep, otherwise my husband said, "What are you gonna do? Have someone come in here and babysit me as I'm listening to a book?" So if you can be a little creative based on, the person how the person is, that helped me.
Mhm. What kind of advice would you offer, or what do you think that your family or friends should have known about Parkinson's disease or caregiving that would have helped you?
Yeah. I think that this idea that Parkinson's is a movement disease and people have tremors and trouble walking, that's it. Boom. That's what they think. We have to get the word out what the disease is really like. I wish more well-known people who have had experience with the disease would speak out. I heard Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes. Her husband recently, I think it was last year, also died of Parkinson's. And she was on talking about the boxing program, which is great, right? No, absolutely, it's great. But that's it. She never, she hasn't talked about, and maybe her husband, maybe he didn't have other difficult symptoms. But I think that that people need to understand the cognitive changes, the behavioral changes, the prevalence of Parkinson's dementia and what that is. I wished I had known more about that. I think I would have been mentally better prepared. And I think I was in the I can do this stage. And our wonderful neurologist kept saying, he's doing pretty good. We can adjust the medication. But in our medical care world, at least where I am, um, there was no help about what do I do now with the dementia, aside from try more Seroquel. We'll increase the Seroquel. Great, but it's so I think more about us. If people knew more about us, they would be more present for us. They'd be more empathetic. And when we ask for help, maybe people would be more likely to provide it, you know? And I think the other thing is we need to ask for help more. I wished I had asked for help more. I wished I had asked for people, someone please just bring me a meal, drop a meal off, or have a service send it 1 or 2 days a week so that I don't have to think about grocery shopping and meal planning and what to cook. I wish people they weren't afraid of seeing the progression and would just come for a cup of coffee and, kind of sit with us. I wish more people would have felt more comfortable just calling me and saying, "How are you?" No, really, "How are you?" And done that on more of a regular basis. Um, but we have to ask.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a wonderful book by a Yale professor. Her name is Zoe Chance, and she wrote this book, "Influencer is Your Superpower." And and by influence, she means sort of getting what you need in a nice way. And in one of her courses, for half the course, she just has people go up to strangers and ask them for things. And her point is the more we ask, the more comfortable we get. I think I can speak for myself and my caregiver group. I don't know if it's our age or that we were all kind of professional women, but we just thought we can do it. We don't need help. And it just, it wears away at you.
Mhm. Yeah. What kinds of things do you think that the medical professionals should know about either Parkinson's or caregiving that would have made your experience better or easier?
Um, I think if they could have helped me understand Parkinson's dementia, how that could manifest, um, and what strategies would be available that I could use in my relationship with my husband and as a caregiver that would make it easy or for him and for me. I didn't know anything about the dementia part of it. Um, the other thing is I didn't know my husband had he had cataract surgery on the first eye, and with the sedation, he had a psychotic break the next day. And I didn't know what to do. He was in the hospital, he had to be restrained. It was awful. I didn't know who to call. I'm like, what do I do? And the caseworker is saying, well, he's going to have to go to a nursing home where they restrain people. And I'm like, no, I mean, I, and I called my husband's primary care physician, and she's like, I don't know, and I would have to see him. And I said, you can't see him. He's in the hospital. He's tied down, and he needs to be discharged somewhere. And I don't know, should I be looking at memory care or skilled nursing or bringing him home? Like, what do I do? So I wish that more PD neurologists also offered maybe social workers to help us with those questions. The medical stuff, like, take more of this drug, less of this will make his blood pressure go down, so do this. That is easy. It's the other part. So I think if we could develop a new medical model,
Mhm, mhm.
I think we could have gone to the neurologist less. And if we had had a social worker that was part of the team.
Yeah. Did you, were those kinds of issues, strategies for caregiving for someone with dementia, what to do in a crisis at a hospital, were those kind of things discussed at your caregiver support group meeting?
A little bit. What was a little bit different is that people in my caregiver support group had the financial means to hire one or two full-time caregivers to
Mm,
come into
mm,
their home, and they were spending 150 to $200,000 a year. Not an option, you know, for me. So I mean, people were helpful um, about behavioral changes and what they were trying to do. Um, People shared, medications and what was going on. Um, I think in our group, my husband was probably the first one who had the Parkinson's dementia, where everyone else was, their symptoms were more physical.
mhm. Yeah,
So maybe in hindsight, should I have gotten a different group? Maybe. I don't know.
yeah, right. One thing uh, came across also in your book about with regard to the first book you wrote about the 50 ways and 50 noodles, and that it was a more, because it was focused on your mother and brain tumors, it was a sprint, and you could be more optimistic or more practical in a way about
Yes.
caregiving. um, what do you think about, surely you heard this many times when you were caregiving about people saying you need to take care of yourself. When you heard that, did you just throw up your arms and hands and say, "Oh, yet another thing to add to my to-do list," or what was it about self-care that resonated or infuriated you?
I guess it infuriated me because it would just be like self care. Like, what? I was going to go to a spa. I mean, it just was so, it felt like a platitude. It felt superficial. So for me, it was digging in when I took that class on unwinding anxiety, which had been recommended by my primary care physician. She's like, You're going to have to learn how to manage your anxiety." And she was so helpful to me and saying, "You need to take this class to manage how you react to stress and how you react to anxiety." And also I mean, she was a wonderful doctor, would recommend books, so I found reading Pema Chodron and Thich Nhat Hanh so helpful. I mean, I remember one night just reading Pema Chodron, when things fall apart, and her saying, everything has an ending and everything has a beginning. A breath ends, a new breath starts. So even if there was something crazy going on that day, I'm like, the day's over. This is the end of that. And now there's some hours of sleep. So, and then I also love Pema Chodron because she's just so practical. Another night I was just reading stuff, and, and at one point she said, "Just relax." Yes. So I think the self-care, it needs to be very specific. And different things work for different people. And that's why I liked Unwinding Anxiety. I liked a lot of the Buddhist teachings of the many, many tools. There's so many tools. So I also dislike when people say, meditate, you know, take care of
Mhm.
yourself, meditate. It just seemed too broad to me. And so I think breaking it down into the little things that you can do is most helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think another thing that you did for self-care was trying to look at beauty, find beauty
Mhm.
around you and some beauty and joy,
Yes.
even
Yeah,
if it was only for a few minutes.
absolutely. And also dark humor, I think
Mm.
is I have a friend, and her husband didn't have Parkinson's, but he had front temporal dementia. And we would go out for dinner, and I mean, people must have thought we were drunk or something. And we would each tell the other one what our husbands did or said. And we would laugh, like belly laugh over things. And it was just like really sick humor. And if people overheard us, they would have thought we were unkind. But the appreciation, seeing the ridiculous humor in it also really helped me as well. So, when the inanity of some things or the crazy things people do, um, instead of nagging or,
Mhm.
when you can laugh at things, it's
Yeah,
helpful.
and did Greg sometimes join you in those humorous?
No, no,
No.
he didn't see, he, like most people, understood how much he was losing. And there was, and he did everything. He did the big program, the loud program, the meditation, like he did everything. And still the disease just kept chipping away. And he found nothing humorous about it. Um, and, towards the end, he was a proponent. I wish I could get out of it. Can we fly to Switzerland and get me out of this faster? Because the hallucinations were horrible. They were really tough for him, and we kind of hit the max for the Seroquel, and he started fainting, and his blood pressure was like, it was just, he was on so many medications. So it was hard for him,
Mhm.
so I couldn't with him, um, see the humor in things. When I would talk about friends or our children and what was going on, he would say, "Please don't tell me that anymore." It's too
Mm,
sad. It's too
mm,
sad for me to hear that. That's the life I wanted, and this is the life I had. S
yeah. Someone asks, could you leave your husband at home alone to go out with friends, and what would he do in that circumstance?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, again, it was, the disease goes on, so for a long time, yes, I could. Um, Sometimes he would just sleep or, watch television or listen to books. As the disease went on, when I would leave the house, he would get into trouble. And by that, I mean, we had a really, I don't write about it in the books. I really, I couldn't stomach writing about it, but we had identity theft.
Mm,
He would, go online and ask for information about, CDs or special investments. And these scammers would call him and he'd be on the phone with people if I weren't there. And all of our accounts got hacked into.
mm,
And he had opened 18 credit cards. He had opened with the federal government, you got a taxpayer number and opened a company and a credit card to go with the sham company. So, I mean, he
mm.
was smart enough to
Yeah.
kind of know
Mhm,
that, but not realize kind of evil was lurking.
mhm,
And so after a while, he would get into trouble. He also had there were so many porn subscriptions um, on one of the credit cards he hid from me. And of course, people say, "Well, why didn't you just take everything away?" And it was our biggest challenge for me to take all the money away. He just felt like you can't take. I have to have some sense of control over my money. So I
mhm,
took as much away as I could. And quite frankly, Robin, I was exhausted and I just said, whatever's going to happen, I'll clean it up later.
mm.
I can't keep
Yeah,
doing this.
yeah, yeah.
So it wasn't when I was not there, it wasn't so much like the physical stuff. I figure he would call a neighbor or if I was out or a friend, it was the mischief
Mhm,
that
mhm,
he got into. And that I wouldn't find out. I'd come home and everything, he'd be in his room and he was fine. And then, a few weeks later, something I would be like, what? So, and I think that's the hard part of then a person feeling like they're being babysat
mhm.
with someone with them, but people with advanced Parkinson's can get into quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I sensed in the book that there were, I mean, you said a lot in the book, but I also sensed that you held a lot of things back. Um, and and it seemed that, which is, fine. That's your right as an author to to tell
What
those
do you think?
stories.
What was your sense that I might have held back?
Um, I thought you held back. Well, not a lot of anger came out, and most of the caregivers I know, and myself included, um, found a lot of anger and resentment at the care recipient, their family member that they were caring for. And you didn't you sometimes mentioned that you were bitchy and, I remember that word especially, but I didn't detect a lot of anger with you. Um, is that something that you didn't really experience, or is something you kinda held back from talking about?
Well, it's a third thing. It's something I really repressed. I just held it in. And last year, after my husband died, I didn't even cry when he died. I was just numb. And I went to, with an Irish therapy group, they do psychedelic therapy, and to do psilocybin treatment. And the anger I mean, there were 8 people in the group, and They said I was had the most intense experience because I had just repressed all my emotions, which I would not recommend people doing. So
Mm,
I would just get up and it's like, I'm going to do this. And, I repressed too much. And, it's no surprise when you repress intense emotions that they come out in unhelpful ways.
mhm,
So I really had to do that therapy to get at it and get it out
mhm,
and
mhm.
understand it.
Yeah. One of the stories I'd like you to mention, if you don't mind, was about your husband's passing. Because one thing struck me is that you had in your mind, because of your upbringing, that the moments around his death, prior to his death, would be private family time only. But it didn't quite work out that way. Could you talk a little bit about
Of
that?
course,
Yeah,
of
I think
course.
that was a beautiful story.
In my family, I'm from Boston. When someone is going into hospice and actively dying, we get very quiet and we just as the few people to kind of be quiet and allow this silence and love to ease the person out. So I went to got my husband into a hospice center one night. I called my sons and I went to and I got my husband set up and the doctor said, you can go home now. And I came in the next day and I had quiet music and I was getting ready for those days of quietness. And my Greg's cousins were in the hallway. He came from a big Portuguese family. And I said, what are you doing here? Like, how did you know Greg was just transferred to hospice? And they said, well, we didn't. Aunt Irene is across the hall. And so it's what I call in the book, my big fat Portuguese death vigil. So for a week, I had all these Portuguese cousins and aunts and going bouncing back and forth between the two rooms. And at first I thought, I just didn't know what am I going to do? And again, it was another point where I just accepted it. I just surrendered and I thought, there's nothing I can do about any of this. And it turned out to be one of the most loving, beautiful experiences um, with all these cousins and aunts. And people would bring in, like their dogs. And it was a huge, huge lesson. May I learn from my sorrow and be transformed by it. I learned to really the way things go in life and the way things that go in dying, you cannot manage them. But to accept what is, and more than accept it, sort of embrace it because people were caring for me. They were looking out for me. And they're like, you don't need to do anything else. We are here for you. And I thought, wow. So it was really a quite boisterous, noisy experience, and it was so full of love.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you couldn't
wonderful.
plan
Yeah,
that.
exactly, exactly. You said in the book that I think it was in the acknowledgement section that some friends, I think, suggested to you that you introduce more into the book about your early married years
Mhm.
because they said you should have more in the book about your love for your husband. I didn't personally think that there was a lack of awareness of love for your husband. I think that was very clear. But why did why did you reject their suggestions? Because you said in the book that you were focused on your grief, relief, exhaustion, the whole caregiving journey. Why did you reject those
I think
ideas?
that after 16 years of being a caregiver, and as the relationship got chipped away, I couldn't even remember. It was hard for me to access. I can now, a year, stepping back a year from it, I can now. I couldn't remember. I felt numb. I couldn't remember what my husband was like, what we were like together before the disease. I just think, I think that's probably some of the repressed anger and the repressed bitterness. I couldn't find that love. I've heard that from other people, not just with Parkinson's, but who cared for spouses for many, many years. That you know, like 2 or 3, it took them 2 or 3 years
Mhm,
before they could then remember the good parts of their marriage. So while my editor was kind of pushing me to write more about that, I couldn't. I just couldn't remember it, and I didn't want to wait to write the
mhm,
book
mhm,
because my intention is to share my experience and what I went through with other people so they feel heard and seen. And my real intention is then to get on with my life and appreciate what I learned from this experience. But I don't want to be, I mean, I've been doing this week with helping someone whose husband was dying, but I don't want to be known as a caregiver
mhm,
specialist.
mhm. Yeah, I understand. We just have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you one final question, which was, your husband's been gone for a little over a year now. What what new perspective do you have now about caregiving for someone with Parkinson's disease, either in general or your particular
Mhm.
journey?
I think it's to self-compassion, like to just be kind to yourself. So if you were giving advice to somebody, can you give that advice to yourself? To know that you're doing the best you can do, not to compare yourself to somebody else or someone else in your support group, but just give yourself a break. You are doing the best you can do at any point. So stop the judging. And I suppose the last thing is to really stand up for yourself and ask for help that you need. Push the doctors to say, that's unacceptable. I need to understand more about this, and I need more than just a pharmaceutical change. So I think we just we have to fight a little harder, and it's okay. I'm always like, I don't want to be one of those people. um, and even in the assisted living, I didn't push hard until the end, and it's okay. You're not being a pushy broad. You are advocating for your loved one, and you're advocating for yourself, and that's not selfish. That's survival. It's not self-care, it's survival.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for
It's
joining us.
my
That was
pleasure.
really terrific. The book again is Slow Loss, a memoir of marriage undone by disease by Lois Kelly, our speaker today. And of course, people can buy it on Amazon. I know it's in paperback form. Is it in other forms as well,
It's
Lois?
it's in Kindle form, and it's also on Audible as a, you know, so you
A
can listen
talking
to
book.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you can
And are
listen
you
to it.
the speaker for it?
I
Are you?
am. I
Oh,
am.
wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. So someone said some parts of it seem less intense or frightening by hearing my voice. It could
Hmm.
be the bad Boston accent that comes out.
Well, we're getting a lot of thank yous, and thank you so much, Lois. Again, it was just a wonderful, wonderful talk,
Thank you
wonderful
for
to
having me,
hear
and
your
thanks for
story.
all that you do. You have so many amazing speakers, and it's a wonderful, wonderful service. So
Well,
thank
thank you for
you.
that. And to everyone listening, we'll get a recording of this talk today posted on our Stanford APDA YouTube channel soon, and we'll see you at the next event. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.